All right, cool. Let's get started. Welcome to the July 2020 edition of the OpenZFS Leadership Meeting. We have just a few things on the agenda today. So if you have, I see someone's typing in new agenda items, so great. We'll probably have time for that. I wanted to get started by reminding folks about the OpenZFS Developer Summit. I sent out an email update on that yesterday. So we made a couple changes to the dates. We're pushing out the date of the conference by 1 week to avoid a scheduling conflict. So it will be the first week of October rather than the last week of September. Hopefully that works for everyone who's planning to attend. If you already registered, then you should have got an email personally letting you know about this. If you have not registered, registration is open, it's free. More importantly, I've pushed out the deadline, more importantly for this audience, I pushed out the deadline for submitting talks by 2 weeks. So you have almost 2 weeks left to submit a talk. We could use a lot more talks. We've had a few good ones. I have a few ideas. There are a few people that I have still left to bug about my ideas, but there's lots of time still available. So if you have something that you'd like to share with the broader community, then this is a great opportunity to do it. We don't know how many people will attend, but usually, we've had like 100 people in person and a few hundred more that have watched the live stream or videos afterwards. So hopefully being fully remote will give us an opportunity to attract an even larger audience. But obviously we need to have the content. So that's kind of where this this group of developers and folks that are intimately involved with the community comes in to work on that content. So if you have done cool stuff with ZFS, if you're working on developing a new feature that you want to talk about and get some feedback on, if you have used ZFS in a unique situation and maybe discovered some interesting behaviors that that folks might not be aware of, those would all make for great talks. And if you have in mind a talk that you would like to hear but you would not like to give, I will also take that input and try to be the go-between and bug the appropriate people to, or politely request that the appropriate people consider giving talks on those subjects. Any questions on that? All right. Cool. So the first couple of topics that we had were from Alan about some design points on Z standard.
Yeah, so I've been working on finishing up that set of patches that I started quite a few years ago. And the biggest question right now is how to deal with ZFS send compatibility, specifically so that no one accidentally creates a stream they won't be able to receive. The way it seems we've always done it is that new features are guarded by a new flag, so that if the exact ZFS send command you ran on 0.7, you started running on 0.8, it would still be receivable on a machine that was used to receiving snapshots from 0.7. And how to deal with that with Z standard. One of the trickier parts is that if you use Z standard compression on a data set, we compress the embedded block pointers using Z standard rather than LZ4. And the embedded block pointer send stream flag only implies support for LZ4. And we have a couple of options there. We could change it and only compress those embedded block pointers with LZ4 even when you asked for a different compression algorithm, although that also seems slightly weird, but maybe that's what embedded block pointers mean, and we would need a different feature flag for Z standard embedded block pointers or something. And then even if you're doing a send with just -c for compressed, again, that mostly assumes that you're using one of the supported compression algorithms, and there's no way to say, well, what about this newer one?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't, the other problem is if you have the properties included in the NV list, then you can end up setting a compression, or asking the receiving side to set a compression property that's out of the range of its enum, even if you don't use the -c flag and actually aren't sending any of the compressed blocks. You're still saying, compress equals 16, which is off the end of the enum on a 0.8 install.
That's sorry, I'm not sure if I totally followed that last point. You're talking about when you're setting the properties?
Yeah, if you do a ZFS send with -p or capital R,
Yeah.
even if you
Are the
don't
properties
use
not
-c.
Are the properties not sent by the string values? Like,
No.
oh really? So
Yeah, it's
so it
the
would be
enum
like,
value.
it sends it as like compression equals
15 or
16 or whatever.
16 or whatever.
Right.
And it's especially hairy with ZStandard because we use the upper bits to store the levels. So it's 16 and some other number. So it ends up at like 15,000 or something.
Yeah.
And that same thing, I guess, would have applied to when we added SHA-512 and Skeen and all the other checksum algorithms and so on. It's just, I guess, people didn't run into it as much then. Because you could decide not to send the properties, or I think now we have the interface on the receive side where you can override the property, where you could, if you are going to be receiving a ZStandard, replicating a data set from a machine running the newer version to a machine running the older version, you could override and say, ignore the compression property that comes in on the MV list and set compressed to LZ4 or whatever. But how do we make this not create additional headache for people? And how much effort do we put into it? Maybe we just say, if you start using ZStandard, it's your fault that you can't receive ZStandard on older versions of OpenZFS. But it was definitely something I did a lot of in the earlier versions, using it on FreeBSD across 3 different versions. And the fact that a send stream is compatible as long as you don't use any unsupported features was very helpful.
Yeah, I think that those are a lot of good points. And I think we'll probably have to think about the details of each one of them separately, like each of those ways that it could show up, like properties versus embedded blocks and compressed blocks and et cetera. I think I'd like to propose, so 2 principles. One, whatever we send, the receiving side should be able to tell whether it supports it and then give you a like non-horrible error message.
Yeah,
right?
So I think right now
in
it
other
says
words,
this has flags we don't support, but because older versions don't know what the new flags mean, they can't tell you why. But
so I mean, that's kind of like, I'd say that's good enough. That's kind of the minimum requirement. So, we will need to have new bits in the send stream to indicate that that this includes LZ4 stuff, that includes ZStandard stuff. So that's first principle. But the second principle I would propose is a little bit of a departure from what we've done in the past. And I think that we should seriously consider making the default behavior be like, if you're already saying to send compressed blocks or to send embedded blocks, then we send them however they are. And we don't give like a finer grained granularity to, at least like by default, you don't have to specify any finer grained, like which compression algorithms are allowed to be contained in the send stream. The reason is that like we've seen a lot of problems where the default, like we've created this super backwards compatible system, which is rarely taken advantage of and has like occasionally resulted in people shooting themselves in the foot. And I think often resulted in people not getting people seeing suboptimal performance and behavior of ZFS send. Like for example, I just run ZFS send and send my thing to another system, and I'm paying all this like decompression and recompression cost. if only I had known that you're never supposed to use ZFS send, you're just always supposed to use ZFS send -c, then like my life would have been better.
Yeah, I know. And -e and -L and
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So
I
I'd
think,
like to push folks in that direction. I think that ideally we would kind of take a step back, like redesign the ZFS send interface, like user interface, to be aligned around this, like you're always saying the most recent, and then if you want to, you can like down rev it, or like at least making it easy to send like with all the most recent stuff.
yeah, for that, I was kind of thinking back to Josh Petzel's idea for Zpool Create, where we just
Yeah,
have --compat equals OpenZFS 2019 or OpenZFS 2.0 or 0.8 or whatever.
yeah,
And that would do, you know, that, and we'd have a default that maybe isn't all the way to the bleeding edge, but is, so that
a year or
if you're
two ago or
using
something like
the
that.
master branch right now, it would still, your send would be compatible with 0.8, but not necessarily 0.7 unless you specifically asked for that.
Yeah,
But you wouldn't automatically get locked out just because you've started using a new feature. So it let us have a more modern default that could keep increasing while still letting people, kind of do groups of options rather than having to specify every feature individually. Just be like, whatever everything supported in 2019.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I would love to see that happen. I think that like, but I think that I wouldn't stand in the way
No.
of integrating Z standard without that kind of full-blown compatibility thing. I think it's a great motivation. Like if somebody has the time to do it, like this is a great time to implement that. Right before the Z standard goes in. But I wouldn't want to add more, like a bunch more work to Z standard, which has already been very long in the tooth. So I would suggest that, like, unless you're going to take on that big chunk of work now to do that, like, full compatibility matrix mode, I would suggest that we just say, like, you do ZFS send -c, it's just going to send whatever the compressed stuff is. And if you didn't, if the receiving system doesn't have Z standard, then it's not going to be able to be received, and you're going to have to like change your behavior to not specify -c to get that to work,
Right.
or
So
not use Z standard on the system that you're sending from.
if you specify the E or C flags, if
Yeah.
the Z standard feature is active on the data set, we'll set the Z standard flag in the send stream, and
Yep.
it's your fault. And I guess, yeah, as long as you opt out of -E and -C, then you would still be able to receive to a system that doesn't have Z standard.
Yeah. Well, technically,
Except
you're
for the properties
defaulting
problem.
out of them.
Right. Yes.
The
Yeah. So as long
defaults
as
are
you
not.
opt into them, then
Yes.
it'll still be compatible. So that just leaves the properties thing as something to figure out. Maybe
Yeah.
the right answer for that is that you can override the property on the receiving side.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the property thing, like you mentioned, existed before. Like that problem existed before.
Right.
It would be nice. Do you know like what the failure mode is there? Like, does
I
the receive
think
just
it
totally
just
bail?
exit is backup stream is corrupt, E and val. Yeah, and yes, a nicer error message there would be nice. The
Yeah.
problem is, we'd have to, hopefully ship that in 0.8.next or whatever, if there is a
Yeah.
next.
I think that's doable. I think that, I mean, given that Z standard is potentially going to be more, is going to cause people to hit this, to run into this design flaw more often. It would be nice if we could at least get that error message up to the level of like, it's a real error message saying, hey, something here is not supported. I'm sorry, try again.
Rather
Or,
than
like, hey, like your checksum algorithm is not supported. You got to do something different, rather than like exit E and val, you found a bug here.
Yeah, I was just saying, that whole send stream is corrupted. It's like, well, not really. It just contains a value I don't understand.
Yeah, and then ideally maybe having some mechanism to be able to ignore that value that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And drive on, whether that's like a flag or an environment variable, or like you do like -O
compress equals
compress
something that is
equals
supported.
inherit or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. Did you have other stuff or do other folks have questions or concerns about what we're proposing here for the ZFSN compatibility?
Not specific to the Z standard stuff. I think the solution that we came up with is fine, but if we have time to talk about the -- compat thing that we talked about with regard to ZFS send, is like what would go into that compat feature flag set? Because not everything is strictly like progress that you can just always opt into and be fine with that. There are options that you only want in certain situations. For example, -w does not really, like, you wouldn't want to make that the default necessarily, because sometimes you just don't want to send encrypted data sets.
Yeah, yeah. It would only apply to things that are like, this makes it strictly better. Like, sending compressed data, for example.
We were thinking about that when like designing zREPL stuff, and we figured that there are actually not that many options that make stuff strictly better.
Yeah, I mean, it's like large blocks, compression,
Embedded block pointers.
embedded block pointers. That may be it.
Yeah, like I don't know that the.
So it's not a long list, but
Yeah.
I mean, those are important for performance.
Well,
yeah, some way to let us make those three maybe be on by default, but still be able to opt out of them when you want something more compatible.
If we have this mechanism, then it's also a lot easier to do the even better thing when we add new compression algorithms, for example, right? Because then, the compat equals 2019 would know like, oh yeah, I can send compressed blocks, but only, legacy and LZ4, but not Z standard, right? And like managing the fine-grainedness of that would not be difficult if we had that infrastructure.
So would you actually propose to, like, once we have this -- compat flag, would you actually propose to remove the old flags? Because I think it actually makes sense to reduce the combinations of flags and features that could be activated on it.
I guess we could
maybe
deal with that when somebody does that work, but I mean, my gut reaction would be that we should try to keep the flags there.
Or at least, no ops with warnings or something, so that tools will continue to work without being updated.
Yeah, but even so, I mean, like, if your tool is like, I've been doing ZFS send-c for like the past decade, why do I have to go,
Yes.
Is there really a benefit to making people go change that?
Yeah, that's was my biggest concern with these Z-standard changes, was not breaking anybody who's had a replication that's been going for 10 years and has been working fine to suddenly stop working.
Yeah, I mean, and those folks, I mean, they do have to opt into Z standard as a new thing. So, maybe you want to like point this out in the man page, like, hey, if you use Z standard, like FYI, if you do send-c, it's going to include those blocks. So the receiving system needs to know about Z standard as well.
Yeah, I think this what we've proposed is probably less surprising to the user than kind of what I had in mind with the, if you do -c and it's Z standard, it will send it uncompressed and just emit a warning that,
I think
I've
that's
encountered a
more
block that's not
surprising.
compatible. And yeah, exactly. I think that's a lot more surprising, especially since people don't do the sends interactively a lot of the time. And so they're just going to end up, I have the -c and I'm still paying the decompression penalty for no reason now.
Yeah, I think that we want to avoid, like, we've done a bad job with that, and I think we want to avoid that if we can going forward.
Yep.
I think that on, Christian, on your question of the compat thing, doing the like compat for Zpool feature flags is much more compelling because, as far as I know, they are all strictly better. Like there's
Yep.
no reason to have them off aside from compatibility. And there's a whole bunch of them. It is not
Well, yeah,
easy to manage.
I think currently to not get certain features, you have to either, manually specify which ones you want on and off, or do like a V28 and then try to upgrade or something. And it's a bit
it's a big pain.
wonky. Because I know that came up recently with, I think, people using the new TrueNAS Core beta or whatever, because it's based on the master branch has the SpaceMap v2 stuff, and so can't be imported on a 0.8 Linux, ZFS on Linux.
So they're defaulting to some newer features.
Zpool Create defaults to all of the features
defaults
on.
To everything. Yep.
Yeah. And even if you don't turn some of them on, Zpool status nags you until you turn them all on.
Yep. And as I recall, that was part of the proposal.
Yes.
That would turn off that nag.
Yeah, it would just be great. I think from a user experience point of view, it would be great to, even if nothing changes about the stream format, to have those compat names be the same for the send stream and the pool version thing, because they are essentially.
Yeah, they would probably be tied together.
They are not technically tied together, but I think from most users' point of view, they are.
Yeah, you mean in terms of like, I mean, imagine that we would use the same kind of algorithm to decide what those are from the like human algorithm, right? Like we would say, okay, like these are the platforms, these are the releases, compat equals, you can say one of those platforms or releases, or you can say a year, and then it means like all the platforms, like latest releases as of that year or whatever. And we would do the same thing for the send and for the Zpool Create.
Yep.
There've been times when people have used ZFS send streams like tar. So there's a little bit more impetus, I think, to not always move this slider forwards necessarily, like the back end of it, that is. Like I think while you can imagine rolling the pool versioning stuff forward, as we sunset old software versions, I think as an interchange format, like the stability and shape, I think it's a slightly different consideration under some conditions anyway.
Yeah, I don't think that we've proposed actually sunsetting any of the Zpool versions. So like you can create a version 1 Zpool with the latest software and like everything should work, at least as well as it did 15 years ago. And with the send streams, I think the only changes that we made there are to remove the dedupe.
Right.
Send dedupe.
Yeah. I mean, it's been pretty stable so far, which I think is also part of the problem you're talking about. Is the stability is also like it's an upside and a downside. But I think as long as there is a way to continue to produce the really old ones in the new software, I think that use case is covered pretty well. So
I think we should maintain that code, and we should, like, if we do this new compat thing, I think it'll be even easier and more clear to be able to say, like, I want to produce a send stream that can be received on a system from 2010.
Doesn't accidentally have new things in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but with that interface, we stand a better chance of being able to enable some of the features that have been supported since 2010, but that we couldn't safely assume before that everybody had.
Yeah.
I just had one other idea, like from a tool developer's point of view, in particular from 0-bit's point of view, where we have a daemon running on both sides and communicate and all that. What I would actually want is a thing, like a command that I can run on the receiving side that gives me an opaque token or an NV list encoded in something that just declares what features are available on the receiving side. And then you paste that command to the sending side. And this is like definitely compatible with the receiving side.
So like where the stream is ephemeral, effectively.
Yeah.
And you can always negotiate, like at the time that you're creating it, between the source and the destination. That's a pretty cool idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, so like a resume token,
a lot of
but
headache
with
I have right now.
like a resume token, but with just all the ZFS send flags that the other side supports, and then you could just enable them based on
and
that.
actually the resume token already contains a lot of, I think
I think I ran into the
right?
problem that it doesn't always do that, and I think that's where I tripped over. I started it with the capital L, and then I resumed it and didn't have the capital L, and then ended up running
It
into
certainly
that
doesn't
bug.
have
Really?
the granularity of which checksum algorithms and compression algorithms are supported.
Right.
Hmm.
But if it
Okay,
had
then,
the
yeah.
the list of the flags that we can set on the ZFS send stream, if we know what the receiving side understands, then we only set those flags, and we could default to everything the other side supports and nothing it doesn't.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
That sounds like
And
a
it doesn't
cool
sound like it'd be that
hackathon
hard,
project.
but that's what they always say.
Have at it, Alan.
When I'm finished, set standard.
Yeah.
This is
Okay.
clearly all leading to having a fully bidirectional communication between sender and receiver.
Really trying to avoid that.
Real
Yeah, we're
time
going to get
synchronous
there
replication.
eventually, aren't they?
Cool. So, Alan, I saw the next thing you have on the agenda is when we activate the feature flags. I know this has come up with a couple of other meetings.
Yeah,
What
so
do you have on there?
I don't know if anybody's had any more thoughts on this, but currently the problem is if you do ZFS set compress equals one of the Z standard levels, but don't actually create any blocks, the Zpool feature flag doesn't get switched from enabled to active, and then you can import it on a 0.8 or 0.7 machine, and then ZFS will panic when you try to do ZFS list or something because you have this compress enum that's outside of the valid range. And I think we decided the best thing to do is try to enable the feature flag as soon as you set the property, so that if you do need to unset it, you can still ZFS send to the whole data set and destroy it or whatever. And when you destroy the last data set that was using Z standard, the feature flag goes back from active to enabled. But just wanted to check on that before I go write all that code.
It seems like if you set the property and you just haven't written anything yet, the pool should not be importable at that time. So that would make sense, I think.
Especially for these things where it's gonna you're gonna create a block like that, in epsilon time.
Yeah. It is, right. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as I know, the next steps on that are just somebody needs to implement it.
Yeah, well, we had talked about slightly more exotic ideas of trying to ref count it or something to deal with when you change it and so on. But I think it made sense to just, the only way to turn it back off is delete every data set that's ever had Z standard turned on.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine.
Yeah.
I mean, in practice, that is what you would have to do anyways.
Yeah.
Like 99.9999% of the time.
Yep.
Cool. The last thing that was on the agenda from Alexander was, what are the plans for the OpenZFS release? Brian and I had a brief conversation about that a little while ago. Brian, do you want to recap that? I assume you're asking about the 2.0 release.
Oh yeah, just asking because right now we're approaching TrueNAS 12 based on FreeBSD 12 release in a couple months, and then the FreeBSD also is preparing to pull something into head, and doing both from master is not very nice, as was told, at least from compatibility points. So at least putting some landmark would be nice. Well, in addition to, of course, some feature stabilization and quality stabilization.
Yeah, so as Matt mentioned, the plan we talked about was basically to target the middle of August and cut a branch there that will be the 2.0 release and start stabilizing on that. So we're trying to have all the major features in by then. Z standard, any other major stuff for FreeBSD that's needed would be great if we get that wrapped up before we cut a branch. But we're kind of targeting middle of August.
Mid-August sounds great for us, for me. So,
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, so I think the I mean the only real things I think that we are officially not holding the release for any more features. And you know, if Z standard gets in, that's great. If other stuff gets in, that's great. And the main thing is just FreeBSD stabilization. You know, getting all the last bugs and you know, known compatibility issues and little missing integrations done. And then we'll cut. My understanding is what will happen is a little bit different than what we've done in past releases, which is like in mid-August, we'll create a new branch off of the tip of master that is the 2.0 branch. And the master branch will remain open for, you know, whatever new features or things that people want to throw in. And we will have to work, we'll have to, you know, backport changes from the master branch to the 2.0 yet to be released branch for some time until that branch is ready to be released. But the key thing is that, you know, we always have that main branch available for, you know, potentially destabilizing features to integrate. And we have to do a little bit more work to, you know, backport bug fixes and stuff for a little bit longer into the 2.0 staging branch.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's exactly the plan. And the intent is to have everything major merged before we branch, right? And then hold off any major new features in that release branch, but we do our best to stabilize it, which is pretty good now. It's pretty stable, but you know.
Yeah. So I assume that, I mean, we would be pulling things from back into the 2.0 branch on a like as needed basis, not wholesale, right? Like,
yeah,
somebody says, oh, like if we see something that's like, oh, this is like a serious bug, then we'll pull it back into 2.0. Kind of similar like what we do after the release is shipped, right? Like for 2. What I guess it would be 2.1. For 2.1, you know, it would be you know, we'd look at the commits that are on trunk and then port back the ones that are, you know, important bug fixes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think the stated goal is still release in this calendar year, but you know, hopefully sooner.
That's the plan.
Oh yeah, just we need to start to finally release something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
is
just
there
more and more good ideas appear. Yes.
I was going to say, are there critical bits for FreeBSD you still need in the master branch that we should be aware of, or do we have most of that in place now?
No, we're still collecting smaller things here and there. Maybe some of smaller things not yet upstreamed. I don't remember something like more or better shift handling from FreeBSD was not upstreamed, and maybe some other things. The biggest thing we have in FreeNAS that would like to upstream is, I think, copy on write. I think DMU is a spectrologic work that Matt is currently rebasing and improving. It's pretty close, but it's.
Is that work in the FreeNAS product now?
It's in Nightless, in beta 1
cool.
already. So nobody yet terribly complained. So it's in there, and we are going to include it into 12 release. Which should be somewhere end of summer or early September, somewhere there. So it would perfectly coordinate with branching from that point.
Yeah, I think that the main stuff that we want to make sure gets in to the 2.0 release is anything that's like a regression for FreeBSD, where like, you know, something worked with ZFS on FreeBSD, you know, with the Lumos derived implementation, but now doesn't work or doesn't integrate right with the OpenZFS
Oh yeah, of course we have such goals. So we're trying to coordinate all things together to release same time TrueNAS 12 FreeBSD. No, maybe we'll see how it goes upstreaming, but at least now we have already images of unified like unified source trees, so you can build ZFS out of the blade system, not from ports. So more people are able to test it, and we push more people to upstream things rather than commit locally. So we hope to get all things done about same time, somewhere end of summer or early September, for FreeNAS, FreeBSD, and would be good to have OpenZFS branching at least
Cool.
at that point.
Cool.
Brian, is there a tag in GitHub or some way to indicate that a bug or PR does fall into this category of like regressions or things that do need to be fixed before 2.0 ships?
There
Like
was
not
a
want to
project.
have, but actually need to have.
Yeah, I think there was a GitHub project created to track a lot of this stuff,
Okay.
but it may not be totally up to date. We were tracking like missing previous heap functionality there that we considered a regression. We should go look at it and update it, but that's where I would look.
Okay. Yeah. Let's
think it was
take
called-
a look at that after this call.
Ryan Mueller should have some list of things not yet upstreamed. He should remember better. I don't know whether he's on call, but he should be available otherwise.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, definitely let me know if there's stuff, and we'll get it added to that project and at least track it.
Cool. That I think is the end of the scheduled agenda. What else do folks have questions about or want to discuss? I'll give you a silent countdown until before we end the meeting.
I have a quick announcement. I'm planning to release Zpool 0.3 shortly, and I have published a release candidate. If anyone is willing to test that or listening to this and wants to test that, then give it a go and give feedback. Thanks.
Cool. What are the new features in Zpool 0.3?
Basically correctness mostly. So one essential thing is like certain guarantees that you can mess with snapshots, delete them, all that, and Zpool will make sure that the two sides stay in sync by putting holds in place, putting bookmarks in place, and making sure that two sides never can get out of sync. And if you want, also always can resume a replication that you started, because it could happen that an admin or an automatic cron job destroys a snapshot and all that. And then support for encrypted send and receive, and resumable send and receive, of course.
Oh, those are big ones.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, took a lot longer than I imagined.
Cool.
I guess the other thing we have going on at Clara is we've managed to kick off the project to upstream the work we did on being able to do a forced export. So if the pool's suspended because the disks have gone away or something, being able to unwind that properly and export that pool by throwing away the dirty data. So at least other pools also on the system will continue to work. Whereas currently in that situation, you know, if you tried to do ZFS list or something on the suspended pool, you can get stuck with something holding the SPA namespace lock or something, and a lot of stuff won't work on the pool. That's perfectly fine because of the other pools suspended because its disk went away or whatever. And so hopefully in the next few months, we'll have something to show as a pull request.
Great.
With a bunch of extra tests and so on added for it.
Cool. Any more topics? All right, this way you don't have to know how long I'm gonna let the awkward silence be there. Okay, so thanks a lot, everyone.
Good meeting.
Yeah, good.
Is that the first time
quick
we've ever
meeting.
been done early?
I think it might be the second time. So we'll meet again in 4 weeks. That'll be August 11th, and it is at this time again, I'm pretty sure. Cool.
Yay.
See you later.
So use your spare 20 minutes to write an abstract for the Dev
Yes.
Summit.
Submit a
Yeah.
talk for the conference. Thank you, Alan. I'll pay you later.
Bye.